Betsy, whenever you're ready. Hey, Matt Sitter here, CEO of AFN. At AFN, one of our fundamental beliefs is that change is where opportunity happens, and the best way to find opportunity in change is a network that is diverse in experience, expertise, and perspective. For our fireside chats, we try and bring different sources of expertise forward so we all can learn a little bit from it. Today, we've got Jess Agnew with us. She's a Navy veteran expert on leadership development and a trailblazer on the use of AI in scaled leadership development. And we're going to be talking about the power of the pit and thinking about changes in disruption. They happen in industry, they happen with us as people. How can we learn and take advantage of those moments? Jess, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too, Matt.
All right. So thinking about the power in the pit and thinking about, hey, how do we actually, deal with what we're with the challenges that we face out there? First question I want to ask you is just thinking about in the face of failure, who do you know that's ever succeeded without it?
Yeah, nobody, right? I mean, I have a couple different perspectives on failure. I think first and foremost, all failure is a mentality, right? It's a perspective. And I sort of see failure as one step on the way to success. And so I think that owning your own perspective and having a healthy relationship with that feeling of failure, right? The feeling of failure is different than actually failing. And having a healthy relationship with that feeling of failure is how you can make the most of that experience and work your way towards success ultimately.
Great. And, one of the concepts that in a chief of staff conversation we had recently was just around luck. Some people
Yeah.
perceive themselves as lucky, some don't. Like oftentimes luck is, we think about it as something that happens to us versus the agency that we can take around it. How do you react to that idea of luck versus being able to grab onto some agency and take action?
Yeah. So I read a lot. I'm a huge book nerd, right? And there are a couple of different things that I've read over the years that pop into mind with that. The first, and I tried to find the study before the session. I'm going to keep looking for it. Maybe we can send it as a resource later. But there was a study actually that was done around luck a number of years ago. And long story short, we make our own luck, right? Like if you go into something expecting success, you are far more likely to experience success than if you go into something focusing on what if I fail, what if I don't succeed, right? And so the sort of three things that really stick out to me for that is number one, there was a book I read by Annie Duke, and it's called Thinking in Bets, and I love this book because essentially she's a professional poker player. And her theory is that most people engage in their life like they're playing chess, right? Very predictable patterns. If I control this piece on the board, that's definitely going to control the outcome. I can control the flow of all of the pieces, right? But the reality is that life is a lot more like poker, right? You can be an exceptional poker player, and it still is a matter of a combination of your skill and the hand you get dealt. Right. And so how do you make the most of the hand that you're dealt? And so I really like that book for that reason, because it just goes to show that the quality of your decision-making process does not necessarily directly tie to your outcome. Right. And the other thing that I really like is the concept of a growth mindset. And I think that has a lot to do with people's relationship with failure. Right. And so a lot of people now are very familiar with the growth mindset research and everything that's been done. But the bottom line is, if you go into something expecting that you are going to improve, right? Expecting that you have control over your effort and your ability to keep working on things and continuously improve, your outcome is more than likely going to be significantly better than if you just go into it thinking I'm either good or bad at something, I'm going to
Right.
succeed or fail, right? So I think that's really what it boils down to at the end of the day.
Awesome. Yeah. And I mean, I've heard the quote, luck is where opportunity and preparation come
Yeah.
together. But also Bruce Springsteen, he said,
I
I
was
make my
thinking
own
that too.
luck. So,
I was thinking the same thing. Yeah.
when we're power of the pit is what we're talking about today.
hmm
Just when we think about the title,
hmm
the pit, tell me what you mean when we're talking about the pit.
Yeah. So I was an English major, hence my love of books, right? And
Rare breed
I
English major at the Naval Academy, right?
I know. I know. It's yeah, and honestly, I think it was one of the best decisions I ever made. So I was exposed to the concept of the hero's journey when I was a plebe, which is a freshman, right? And it was probably of all the leadership classes that I had to take, because it's part of the core curriculum there, I mean, really all the classes that I took, I think that one theory, that one framework stood out for me the most. And the reason for it is because I think that it is really, at the end of the day, it's sort of the definition of the human experience, right? And so what the hero's journey is you can think of it like almost like a pattern that people go through in their lives, and it's how a lot of our stories, you think movies, books, all of that stuff are modeled after this framework. And so you get this hero, right? And the hero gets a call to adventure, and usually the hero's like, nah, I'm not doing that, that's way too hard, I'm going to go ahead and stay here in this comfort zone because this is what I like. And so they refuse that call to adventure for a little while. And then
Yeah.
usually they're introduced to somebody like a guide or a mentor or something like that. And the guide or mentor is like, sorry, like you're doing this, let's go. Right. And so
Right.
eventually the hero steps into it. They go through a series of trials. After that series of trials, which is meant to test and strengthen them, they fall into what is called the pit. Right. And this is like a dark, deep cave. Sometimes it's a literal cave, right? Think like Harry Potter. Or sometimes it's a metaphorical cave. It can be a cave of your own creation. And I think every human goes through some version of this, right? Where they go through some trials in their life, some really hard things, and then eventually they find themselves in this dark place where they're like, I don't know if I can actually climb out. I don't know if I have what it
Mhm.
takes, right? And I think that moment where you're sort of staring into the abyss and you're like, do I actually have what it takes to rise out of this? That is, I think, where the greatest development in your character actually comes from. And so that's what the pit is. It's this place of being sort of forged in fire and really feeling out what it is that you're made of, what it is that motivates you, what do you believe in, and what do you need in terms of your own mentality and sometimes external resourcing, right? In order to get out of this pit place.
Yeah. Well, it's fine. So leading up to this, we were talking about kids going back to school and things like that. And I think a lot of parents say, like, hey, I just hope my kid is happy. But I think part of what we're looking for is for them to have the experience of like doing hard things and being able to overcome, right? Like if
Yeah.
they never have to do hard things, that's not a life well lived.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it sets him up for a little bit of a failure, right? Like, I think we all know the story of the sheltered kid that goes to college and is like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Right? Like, so I think, I think trials are really important. I think those little things that sort of test you. I'm a runner, right? And so I think about it's almost like you getting stronger. Everybody talks about working out and things like that. But what's actually happening when you're strengthening a muscle is little tears, right? You're tearing the muscle, little tiny bits and bits, and then it comes back together and it gets stronger. And I think it's the same for our character and our resilience.
So you talk about fear, the hero's journey, and kind of, hey, I'm a call to adventure. I'm not going to go there. Why do you think people are afraid of the adventure? Are they thinking about the pit already? Like why do you think that happens?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with a lot of clients around this sort of mentality, right? And I think it's similar for a lot of people in a lot of ways, but I also think everybody's got their own thing that they're kind of worried about, right? But I think at the end of the day, I really think it boils down to that question of, do I have what it takes? I don't know, right? Life is hard.
Hmm.
Like life is hard. It's designed to be hard. And it's also really beautiful, right? So I think that when people kind of hesitate in that call to adventure, I mean, I think it's really around avoiding discomfort, avoiding pain, and avoiding that question of what if I don't have what it takes?
That's fair. When we're thinking about those hard chapters, when someone's actually going through it,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a range of reactions that we have out there.
Yeah.
What shows up in leaders during those hard chapters?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen it all. I'm sure you have too, right? Like some people pretend that they've gone through the pit, right? They're like, oh yeah, this was really hard. Thank God I'm on the other side of it now, right? And you're like, you haven't
Mm,
even stepped in. I think that's like a big part of it. And that in and of itself is kind of a little bit of a test, right? They're sort of projecting past the pain because they're like, I'm out of it, I'm out of it. And you're like, I
okay.
don't think you're out of it. I think that's one way. I think another way is there's the healthy way, right? Like I've seen a lot of people actually who kind of go into this pit, and everybody processes through the pain, right? Like the pain of
Hmm.
the pit is inevitable. How how efficiently you process through that pain, I think has a lot to do with the way that you resource yourself. And I think that being able to resource yourself effectively is reliant upon how well you know yourself, right? Because everybody
Okay.
needs different tools in their toolkit. And so the only way you know what tools you need to get through the pit is through self reflection, an understanding of how you engage with pain or fear or frustration or anger or failure, right? Knowing how what your patterns are and being able to resource and equip yourself to navigate through that process efficiently.
So, when someone's stuck in the pit and, they may be in the wallowing state, are some people just that way, or is there ways to actually learn how to attitudinally approach it differently?
Yeah, I think there's always a way to learn it, right? I think some
Okay.
people have been programmed or programmed themselves to wallow, for
Okay.
sure, right? But I think it's a matter of programming. Our minds as humans are pattern machines, right? And so if you have spent your life sort of in this wallowing or ruminating pattern, right? Where something happens and you just kind of lash yourself over and over again and you just stay there. It's really difficult to break that pattern. It requires a great deal of self awareness. And sometimes that awareness can come through therapy. Sometimes it can come
Hmm.
through tough love from a friend, right? And sometimes it can come through an aha moment in the shower, right? Like where you're like, wait, what am I doing? Right.
Right.
And so I think that level of self-awareness is always the first step. Now, whether or not it takes an external catalyst or an internal aha moment,
Yeah.
I think depends a lot on who you are, where you are in your life, and what you're experiencing. Um, yeah.
Yeah. We can't trivialize. So saying self-awareness is important. Like, we can't just say you should be more self-aware,
Yeah.
right?
Be
You do have to,
self-aware. Do it now.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're not saying it's easy, but like
Yeah.
figuring out what steps you can take to actually become more self-aware is an important skill that people should be trying to take on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think we talked a little bit about the wallowing, right? And a little wallowing can sometimes be helpful as long as you don't get stuck there, right?
Right.
Because if you use that time, and I say wallow, I mean reflection, but if you look at experiences and you look at it and you say, okay, what were the patterns that I engaged in? What were the external
Yeah.
circumstances that contributed to the way that I engaged in it, right? If you sort of approach it like a scientist and you're trying to figure it out, and you do that so that you
Okay.
can learn from it and apply it going
Yeah.
forward, that's how you break a pattern. That's how you break any pattern, right? Is sort of disrupting that loop for yourself and then figuring out which elements of it you need to change or work on in the future in order to create new patterns for yourself.
So if you're in the middle of one of these phases, maybe you're in a wallowing moment, and I think it happens to all of us where we get stuck during one of these moments.
Yeah.
What are some ways that what are some pattern interruptions that you think people can do that they should be thinking about that they could employ at any time? You got a little sticky note next to your computer, is just like, oh yeah, I should do what Jess told me.
The sticky note phase. That was such a an interesting phase of our society. Do you remember that when everybody was
I
putting
still
sticky
got
notes
them.
on their mirrors? Do you? I love that. I love that.
I
Maybe
didn't
I'll
move
bring it back.
past it.
Maybe I'll bring it back.
Yeah.
It's good. You keep it. You keep it alive.
All right.
I think that reminders are good. Like I was joking with the sticky note thing. I think reminders are really good. But I think that there is actually a process that you can go through if you truly want to break yourself out of this wallowing pattern, right?
Yeah.
And it, like I said, it has to do with the systematic sort of dissection of the experience itself. So what I like to guide clients through if they're kind of stuck in this wallowing phase, right? I break it down. I break it down into its core elements. So we'll take a bad experience or a hard experience, something that's really weighing them down, right? And I'll say, okay, what are the circumstances and facts, the factual things that are contributing to this experience for you?
Yep.
And when I say a fact or a circumstance, that won't change if your perspective about it changes, right? That's what makes it a fact. It's separate
Okay.
from your own personal belief about that fact. We're talking like, okay, let's say I live in California. I know you do too. And stereotypical California drivers are a thing, right? Like bad California drivers are a stereotype, right? So let's say I'm at a stop sign and somebody just blows through it, right? And I have a reaction to it for whatever reason. I personally have been in a couple of car accidents recently, right? And they were definitively not my fault, right? And so somebody coming out of left field and blowing through a stop sign could be
Right.
really activating for me. And so if I wallow in it, let's say I have my kids in the back seat, right? And I'm just like wallowing and I'm like so upset and we're driving to school. And then I'm frustrated and I drop my kids off and I drop them off frustrated and then they panic because they're sensing my panic, right? And it can spiral and then you can dwell on that for a long time.
Okay.
Alternatively, what I could do is, and you can do this in a matter of seconds, I could stop and I could say, okay, what were the facts and circumstances, things that wouldn't change if my perspective about them changed? Somebody blew through a stop sign. That is illegal. That is unsafe. I
Yep.
have been in car accidents recently. And I observed a car that could have
Right.
potentially hit me. Those are all facts, right? My perspective of them would not change those facts. So I take those aside and I say, okay, those were the contributing factors. Then I say, okay, let's look inside. What were my feelings that I experienced in that moment? And feelings are emotional responses, chemical responses. They're usually one word, sometimes two, but they describe sort of an energetic state inside of your body. So fear, anger, rage, panic, right? Those are
Yeah.
all of the feelings that I would have experienced in that moment. And there is a lot of science affiliated with the fact that if you name a feeling, you are able to process through that feeling more efficiently, right? Naming it has power. So naming those feelings, okay, those are all the feelings that I'm experiencing. Okay, what are the stories that I'm telling myself? What are the thoughts, right? The thoughts that you have in your head and the stories that you share in your mind, right? Those internal narratives that drive us. Those are the things that actually add context to those feelings that make them impactful, right?
Okay.
That's what makes them more than a chemical reaction inside of our bodies. That is what makes it linger or allows us to process through it. So stories that I'm telling myself, in that moment, maybe I go, oh my gosh, I'm having such a string of bad luck. Why are all of these cars out to get me? Like,
Yeah.
why do I keep getting hit by cars? That would be a very easy narrative for me to fall into right now, right? Oh my gosh, that person, what a jerk, right? What a jerk to just like blare
Yeah.
through that stop sign. That keeps me stuck in anger. That keeps me stuck in fear, right? So naming those narratives that kind of come into my brain, that is something that will sort of keep me in that wallowing state, right? But naming them allows me to get what's called a little bit of psychological distancing. So then I say,
Yep.
okay, me thinking that person's a jerk, that's a thought I'm having right now. right? There's the psychological distancing. You make it less about something that's just coming out of you, and you make it something that is frozen in time. It's a moment of time. It's something that you are experiencing. It's not something that is you, right?
Hmm.
So you just get a little space there. And then the other tool is reframing, right? So it doesn't necessarily matter if you pick the right story, right? The only
Okay.
thing that matters is that you pick a story that allows you to loosen your grip on the story that's keeping you stuck, right? So you're just
Okay.
loosening your grip on it. So an example of that could be instead of thinking stories like, oh, they were probably texting, right? Keeps me wallowing. I could say, man, I wonder if they were experiencing an emergency. They might have been experiencing an emergency. They might have just gotten some really bad news that was so distracting to them that they blew through that red light. Maybe they're new to the area and they didn't notice the stop sign, right? All of those narratives could also be true. They might not be, they might just be a jerk.
Okay.
But if I pick a narrative that allows me to loosen my grip on the ones that are keeping me stuck in anger, worry, fear, and panic, that will allow me to get a little bit more spaciousness. And then I can process through that emotional experience a little bit faster. Right. So back to your original question of how do you sort of break out of that wallowing state? That's how you break out of it. And that's one way that you can break out of it in the moment.
Yeah, so that examination of, hey, I'm
Mm-hmm.
having these thoughts and this emotion right now, and
Mm-hmm.
then some sort of replacement narrative for it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you only need one replacement narrative, or and does that open up your whole brain on loosening up that grip, or do you need to be thinking
Yeah.
about many?
I think you need to be paying attention to yourself and notice when you're loosening the grip, right? So
Okay.
keep rolling through narratives until you land on one that is able to activate your sense of empathy. And from what I found, empathy is a really good antidote to anger, panic, fear, rage, if it's directed at another person, right? Or if it's directed at the universe or the world or your company or whatever, right? Empathy is usually a pretty good antidote to that.
Okay. And part of what we've been talking about is like, wait, what are steps you can take yourself if you see someone else who might be in this like wallowing state or they're stuck?
Mm-hmm.
Um, how can you help them out?
Yeah. Man, that's such an interesting question because a lot of times people just need somebody to sit with them. I think it depends on the level of grief, right? And so that's a complex question, but I think it has to do with practice. Um, I always, when somebody's in a state of grieving or a state of wallowing or fear, I like the consent route. You'd be surprised how infrequently people get asked the question, hey, what do you need right now? Um,
Mm,
to
okay.
the extent that sometimes being asked that question can be really nerve wracking, right? Like, what do you mean? What do I need? I don't need anything. I'm fine. But I think that approaching it from a position of care and compassion,
Okay.
I think that care and compassion usually shines through.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think from our conversation, everyone has their pits that they're going
Yeah.
through. Is just like,
Yeah.
hey, if everyone's going through it, sometimes you get the opportunity to maybe be the person who's sitting and listening or asking what you need.
Yeah. Yeah. That wise guide in the hero's journey that we were talking about. Yeah.
Um,
I think it can be helpful.
you're pretty passionate about this. Why?
Hmm.
Why the passion? Why are you interested in this?
I think it's a universal struggle. I think that this is something, I think that this is something that really ties us together as humans is we really are all in it together, right? And I think that's a perspective, but that is my perspective. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I mean, I think, we talked about that idea of how people conceive of themselves. There can be the woe is me, bad luck. I
Hmm.
would say also like, hey, all right, turns out humanity, the way that I heard you say this is humanity is actually a team here.
Yeah. It's a
We
team
got a lot
sport.
that we're trying to go through together. Who knew?
Mhm. Yeah, exactly.
So in terms of, there's one question I always like to ask. So we're in
Mhm.
we're in August now. We're two-thirds done with the year.
Wild.
Um, what are you looking forward to in the rest of 2025? Because there's a lot of change and stuff going on out there. What's a bright shining light that you're looking towards?
Oh man, I think there's a lot. So I th I think that there's a lot of change afoot, right? I think there's a lot of change happening both in our society and our world. Technology is changing rapidly. And I think that there is a lot of fear that can always be associated with change, right? But I also kind of going back to this whole concept of power in the pit, like the pit is where you figure out what you're made of, right? It wouldn't be a very good story if there wasn't a pit. It would just be kind of boring, right?
Right.
So this sounds weird, but I think we are in a lot of ways in a little bit of a pit in our society right now. I think some people are rising out of it in productive ways and some are stuck. But I think a shining light for me is that this is the powerful part of the narrative, and I'm excited to see what comes out on the other side. And I have a lot of hope in that.
Great. So we'll open it up for questions. If you got a question to ask, just come up on the video. While folks are doing that, or you can put it in the chat. Just while we're waiting for people to ask questions. So one of the pits that is out there, boogeyman is AI. We said you're a trailblazer in AI. Why are you
Yeah.
so passionate about that? Like, how does that actually, when we're thinking about this relative to, what could be a pit out there and how you could actually approach it? How are you approaching this differently? Why are you engaging in that so heavily?
Yeah. I'm so glad that you asked this question. I love this topic. So I think that every time as a species, right, that we have gone through a huge technological disruption, even things like the Industrial Revolution, right? We get really enthusiastic as a species about the potential of the tech, right? And I think that sometimes we get so enthusiastic about that we overlook the ramifications of the tech and we miss the opportunity to navigate it in a way that is actually productive without doing a lot of fallout on the other side. And then we kind of have to rebound and try and sort of right the ship. And I think that, that happened with social media too. And so I think with AI, what really excites me right now, and the tech is advancing rapidly. So, I mean, we might have to do this a little bit anyway, but I do think that the right conversations are starting to happen. I think that there's a lot of conversations about like, okay, we don't know what the limitations of the capabilities of this technology is, but we know how it might be impacting humanity. And
Mhm.
we need to be aware of that, right? And so that alone, I feel like is great that those conversations are happening. I think they should be happening more. But I love that the conversations are happening. And I think the other thing when it comes to AI, I think that you asked me what excited me about it, but maybe I'm
Yeah,
starting to
why are
get
you jumping
lost in
on
my
that train?
passion.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think that AI has the potential to do a lot of good in this world. And so I'm going to use one specific example just because it's my area of expertise and it's what I can talk about the most knowledgeably. So one of the main use cases for AI right now is companionship and therapy, right? Therapy, coaching, companionship. And I think that that is really beautiful because it democratizes something that has been really difficult for a lot of people to access, right? Coaching is expensive, therapy is expensive. And so the
sure.
fact that this is a tool that will be able to give it to people who probably need it the most at a pretty low barrier to entry, I think that that is a beautiful opportunity, right? Now, we've seen some limitations in the tech already, and there are definitely ways of engaging in that are unhelpful. I think probably the most dangerous way to engage in AI is using it as sort of like a magic 8 ball, where you're like, okay, what do I need to do now? And you shake the magic 8 ball, and it's like, ask again later, or yes, the answer is clear, right? Like you don't really want to use AI for
Sure.
that. It's not a predictive model in terms of what you should do or advice giving. But I think it's a really good reflection tool, right? I've written a little bit about that, but I think that is what excites me the most, is just the fact that I think it's going to, if done well, if navigated effectively, it can really lower the barrier to entry to a lot of self-actualization resources that have been largely unavailable to people.
Well, I mean, to connect it to how we're thinking about the power of the pit, I would say like it
Yeah.
shouldn't be something that takes away your agency on it. You know,
Yes.
it would be a
Yes.
tool for you to continue to look at your agency and like you're still in control in some way, but
Yeah.
you can make more informed decisions perhaps, or think about things that you might not have otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of times going back to agency, right? Like weirdly, I feel like as humans, like free will is something that is consistent across most cultures, right? Not all, but most cultures have some sort of free will concept that is an underlying belief, right? And also, I think it's the thing that we forget the most as humans, that we actually have free will and we are actually in charge of our lives,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And so I think that what you just said is really powerful. And I think that that is something that can be applied to really anything. It's like, am I using this in a way that puts me in the pilot seat of my life, of my career, of my decisions, of my
Yeah.
behaviors? Or is it something that I'm using to sort of make excuses so that I can stay comfortable in an autopilot?
One of the questions that just came in the chat, thinking about how we're helping others through it, and many leaders consume the content of AFN, and thinking about like how do you help your team
Mm-hmm.
through a pit that they're going through right now. And if you want to take a look at the question really quick,
Mm-hmm.
there's threats to this person's nonprofit work, um, and they might be worried about their own safety. But what would you do in that situation? What are some of the
Oh,
tools that you
such a
might
good
help the leader
question.
employ?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Oh, that's such a good topic. Safety, right? Safety's big. Um, and so if you are talking to somebody and they are in a state of threat, right? We're talking like Maslow's hierarchy threat, right? My
Hmm.
livelihood is in a threatened state. Um, that's a really dicey place, right? Because people are going to be reactive in that space. They can't help it. They've been sort of governed by that fight or flight response a little bit.
Yep.
And so I think that as leaders, the first thing that, and the most effective thing that you can do if you notice that either an individual on your team or your team as a whole is in that sort of fight or flight state, you have to soothe the nervous system. And you can't always soothe the nervous system by saying like, hey, it's going to be okay. Right. Uncertainty is inherently jarring. Right. So I think as
Yep.
leaders, kind of going back to what I said earlier about like naming the feeling can help you process it more efficiently. I think a lot of leaders try and pretend like everything's fine, or they withhold information from their teams. They sort of gatekeep because they're like, oh, if I give them this information, they're going to freak out. They're already freaking out, right? Like you
Right.
holding
Right.
a lot of information, and there's a time and space, and a way of delivering things. And I'm not saying just open the floodgates, but I am saying that sometimes just naming the discomfort can do a lot for sort of soothing people's nervous systems, because it makes them feel like you are going to give them as much information as you possibly can when you can. And that builds trust, right? So I think soothing the nervous system in whatever way you are able, whether it's, in this question, it was talking about helping certain populations could threaten their jobs or risk their safety. That is a very real concern, right? And I think naming that and saying, hey, I can't promise you that that's not going to happen. I mean, maybe you can. I don't know the details of your situation, but like if you feel like you can't,
Yeah.
right? Just naming that, say, I can't promise you that that's not going to happen. What I can promise you is that I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that you are prepared, you are set up well, you are supported, and we're going to move through this together. And I'm going to give you as much information as I possibly can so that you can plan and prepare, right? Even though that's not like probably what they would hope to hear. It's not like everything's going to be fine.
Right.
Sometimes
Right.
that support is enough to soothe their nervous system so you can start to have important conversations.
Yeah. Well, and it may just be paving the path towards the next important conversation as well. Like you're probably not going to
There's
totally
no
solve
holy
the
grail.
situation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Great.
Exactly.
One of the other questions was like in your course, The Power of the Pit, what do you try and cover in it?
Yeah.
How are you approaching it in ways that people can actually take away the knowledge and tools that they need?
I definitely want to answer that. I want to one more thing about the last topic because I think
Yeah,
it's
go ahead.
really really important. Speaking of trust, right? Like trust is a leader that is king. Trust is king, right? And I think a lot of people view trust like it's an on-off switch. Like, oh, you trust me, it's flipped on, great. But really, it's more like I use this metaphor a lot in coaching. It's more like a sound mixer, right?
Yeah,
You are in control of what you share, how you share it, how you show up, how you repair if you mess it up, right? And all of those things, depending on how much you dial it up or down, what you choose to engage in, how you choose to engage, that is what is going to facilitate the continuous development of trust. It's not an on-off switch. It's something that you have to continuously manage and dial up and dial down certain
yeah.
things to try and keep it at that equilibrium state. And it does take continuous effort. It's not something that's just a check in the box. So yeah, I just wanted to say that piece.
That's great. Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the elements of trust that I commonly talk about is consistency. So,
Yeah.
you've got like, are you behaving competently? Are you consistent? And how's your character showing up? Like consistency, I think what you're saying is you got to earn trust over and over and over again. You can't say like, all right, I did it. Now I can go off and do something else for a little while. It's like you're working to maintain that trust.
Yeah. Yeah. Trust is something that's created between two people, right? I think a lot of people say trust is earned. I had a mentor once that said, trust is actually never earned. It's always given. It's always a choice, right?
Hmm.
Which I think is an interesting framing. My personal belief is that it's both, right? It's something that you continuously create together with, another group or another person. And it takes maintenance like anything else. So yeah.
All right, back to the Power of the Pit course.
Power of the Pit.
What do you
Yes.
do in it? What happens?
Yeah. So Power of the Pit, I love this because like I said, I think it's something that everybody goes through. And I think so many people try to rush through the pit. And it's really unfortunate because if you rush through the pit, you're not going to get the most out of it. Right. And so what I like to say in the course is what we do, we look retrospectively. And sometimes that retrospection is like yesterday. And sometimes that retrospection is like a year ago, right? Or 10 years ago or whatever. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to maintain a little bit of presence, a little bit of reflection, and a little bit of planning, right? And so in this process, we historically go through a pit moment and we stay in it long enough for your eyes to adjust to the pit, so to speak,
Okay.
right? We stay in it long enough for you to be able to look at all of those pieces that were contributing to it.
Yeah.
And then we do a little bit of what I like to call values mining. And so in that experience, we'll say, okay, what were the things that are part of your core makeup, your driving force, right? That were in jeopardy there, that were being challenged, or that were helping you stay strong so that you were able to move through that, right? And so through that process of reflection, what we do is we really optimize the pit. And
Yeah.
then we move through that together. And then at the other end of it, we take that and we use it in a way that helps them apply those lessons to the next time they're going to go through the pit. Because fun spoiler alert, you go through a lot of pits in your life, right? It's not just a one
I just
time
wanted to go through
thing.
one and one and done.
Yeah, exactly. It's gonna happen again, right? So,
Yeah.
So through this process, we collect what I like to call your values constellation or your values compass. We figure out sort of what those driving factors, those things that make you uniquely strong and gifted. And then we talk about those in a way that allows you to, the next time you enter into maybe even the trials or the pit itself, you're going to have that level of self-awareness so that you can move through that process more efficiently. Not faster necessarily, but more efficiently every time.
Got it. All right, another question that's in the chat. I love your incorporation of the hero's journey into this concept. Do you think everyone is on one big loop of the journey across their life, or are we on multiple loops of the journey, or is it both? You referred a little bit to where we're going to hit another pit, but go for it. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, that's why sequels are a thing, right? Or prologues. I think we go through a lot of it, right? I think we go through it over and over again. I think that's kind of the human journey, right? Is we go through this pattern of chaos and struggle and pain and strife, and then rising out of it and strength. And there's also a period of time where sometimes you just sit in the wonderfulness, right? Or the ease. That's just as important as the rest of it, right? So you kind of go through this cycle over and over again throughout your life.
Well, and I think to your point is like the pit hurts. And so therefore we don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about it when we're not in it. But if you're going to go through it a lot, if it's going to be repeated, having some tools to help you with it along the way would be pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it helps you, going back to like what gives you more agency over your life and what gives you less agency in your life. I think going through this process and reflecting, and getting those core values that I talked about, that really allows you to navigate the pit where you're in control of navigating it, rather than like it just happening to you, it being something that's happening to you. It is something that's happening to you, but you are in charge of the direction you walk through it, right? So I think that is sort of the key point to all of this, is how do you actually navigate through this from a place of agency, rather than reactivity.
Great. All right, opening up to further questions. If you want, throw it in the chat or come up on the video. All right, Jess, any final words for you in terms of thinking about anything we didn't cover that you think would be a good takeaway for folks?
I think that ultimately, if I could give everybody one key takeaway from all of this, is the pit is subjective, right? And I think that the thing that leaders need to remember, because part of leadership is helping people navigate their pits and their trials, right? And comparison just doesn't help anybody, right? So I don't think it matters how bad or how hard or how dark your pit is. If it feels like a pit to you, then it's pit. And if it feels like a pit to a member of your team, it's pit, right? Okay. And so that, I think, is probably the number one thing that I want everybody to remember, is that the depth and darkness of somebody's pit is totally subjective, based off of an entire lifetime of experiences. And that's what determines how that pit feels, not just those external facts and circumstances that we talked about. Yeah. Right. So empathy is a best way to navigate all of that for yourself, self-empathy, and also for other people as a leader.
Awesome. Thanks a ton, Jess. Really appreciate you giving us some ideas on how we can take advantage of the power of our own pits.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
This was great. Thanks for having me.